Rupi Kaur is a poet, illustrator, and performer who was born in Punjab, India on October 4, 1992, to Sikh parents. She and her parents emigrated to Canada when she was 4 years old. Rupi Kaur has written, illustrated, and published 3 poetry books, one of which is titled Milk and Honey, which is written without any capitals. In fact, she does not use any capitalization or any punctuation other than the occasional period mark in her poetry and poetry books. She stated that she does not use capitals because in the Gurmukhi script of Punjabi, her mother tongue, there are no uppercase or lowercase letters. The letters are treated the same. I enjoy this simplicity. It's symmetrical and straightforward. I also feel there is a level of equality this visuality brings to the work, a visual representation of what I want to see more of within the world. Equalness. The only punctuation that exists within Gurmukhi script is a period, represented through the following symbol. So in order to symbolize and preserve these small details of my mother language, I ascribe them within my work. A visual manifestation and ode to my identity as a diasporic Punjabi Sikh woman. It is less about breaking the rules of English, although that's pretty fun, but more about tying in my own history and heritage within my work. Some of Rupi Kaur's influences include her mother's paintings, creating art with an elderly Punjabi Sikh couple when she was a toddler, her love of reading books growing up, and playing kirtan for 8 years. Kirtan is a Sanskrit word that means narrating, reciting, telling, describing of an idea or story, specifically in Indian religions. It also refers to a genre of religious performance arts, connoting a musical form of narration or shared recitation, particularly of spiritual or religious ideas. Following kirtan, Rupi started performing spoken word poetry slams and open mics in 2009. She then went to college and studied rhetoric and professional writing at University of Waterloo, Ontario. In 2013, she started posting her poetry online and had many readers. At the end of 2014, she self-published her poetry book, Milk and Honey. Rupi was told by a professor not to bother publishing and to especially not bother self-publishing unless she is to publish individual poems in literary journals, magazines, and anthologies. As she attempted to choose which individual set of poems she wanted to publish, Rupi came to the realization that separating her pieces from one another gave them entirely different meanings. Readings that did not have the same resonance as they do when they are designed together in a book. So refusing to allow her art to be framed in a way that society allows poets to frame it, she put together the poetry book Milk and Honey in a way that gave her poetry more meaning and context, self-published it, and eventually had a publisher republish it. In 2015, she acquired more fame when she spoke out about Instagram's attempts to censor her photography, aiming to challenge the taboo surrounding menstruation. While people threatened to kill her for creating an image about menstruation, Rupi points out that many people came for the photo, but they stayed for the poetry. The menstruation photo was a part of her photo series project for her visual rhetoric course. She captioned the photo with the following message: I bleed each month to help make humankind a possibility. My womb is home to the divine, a source of life for our species, whether I choose to create or not. But very few times is it seen that way. In older civilizations, this blood was considered holy, and some it still is. But a majority of people, societies, and communities shun this natural process. Some are more comfortable with the pornification of women, the sexualization of women, the violence and degradation of women than this. They cannot be bothered to express their disgust about all that, but will be angered and bothered by this. We menstruate, and they see it as dirty, attention-seeking, sick, a burden, as if this process is less natural than breathing, as if it is not a bridge between this universe and the last, as if this process is not love, labor, life, selfless and strikingly beautiful. The following poem about menstruation is in her poetry book, Milk and Honey. Apparently, it is ungraceful of me to mention my period in public, because the actual biology of my body is too real. It is okay to sell what's between a woman's legs more than it is okay to mention its inner workings. The recreational use of this body is seen as beautiful, while the nature of it is seen as ugly. Themes found in her poetry books include focuses on anatomy, gender-based violence, socialization, femininity, poverty, beauty standards, race, fertility, sensuality, and nature. There are times when her poetry and illustrations both subvert and reinforce the male gaze and sexualization, such as in the following poem and illustration. You have been taught your legs are a pit stop for men that need a place to rest, a vacant body empty enough for guests, but no one ever comes and is willing to stay. As realism is a fundamental aspect of photography, Rupi's menstruation photography series can be considered realism. It has been the push of realism with artists such as Suzanne Valadin that depict women in a more natural light. Valadin's female nudes fuse observation with a knowledge of the female body based on her experience as a model. Rejecting the static and timeless presentation of the monumental nude that dominates Western art, she emphasizes context, specific moment, and physical action. Instead of presenting the female body as a lush surface isolated and controlled by the male gaze, she emphasizes the awkward gestures of figures apparently in control of their own movements. Although Rupi's line illustrations are not realism art like Valadin's paintings, Rupi's line illustrations emphasize context, especially along with her poetry text. Furthermore, Rupi's poetry itself certainly incorporates literary realism, such as mentioning the importance of consent and how both partners must be involved, not just males. Sex takes the consent of two. If one person is lying there not doing anything because they are not ready or not in the mood or simply don't want to, yet the other is having sex with their body, it's not love, it is rape. Or how there's so much more to women than outer beauty. I want to apologize to all the women I have called pretty before I've called them intelligent or brave. I'm sorry I made it sound as though something as simple as what you're born with is the most you have to be proud of, when your spirit has crushed mountains. From now on, I will say things like, you are resilient or you are extraordinary. Not because I don't think you're pretty, but because you're so much more than that. This last sentiment in particular shares a connection with Miriam Shapiro and her work on vaginal womb art. To many, these works by her may not appear to be anything more than what they seem, but in reality, it's much more complex than that. The imagery they describe should not be viewed simplistically as vaginal or womb art, but should be understood by providing a framework within which to reverse evaluations of female anatomy in patriarchal culture. Kaur employs a similar tactic here, urging the reader to look beyond the exterior of a woman. Don't just judge them for what they look like, but what they stand for. You are worth more than your own outward appearance. The following poem is an example of how Rupi speaks out against beauty standards. Hair. If it was not supposed to be there, would not be growing on our bodies in the first place. We are at war with what comes most naturally to us. In many illustrations such as this one, Rupi compares hair on her body to plants or nature. For example, she does it in the following two poems and illustrations. I am water, soft enough to offer life, tough enough to drown it away. The next time he points out the hair on your legs is growing back, remind that boy your body is not his home. He is a guest. Warn him to never outstep his welcome again. Portraying women as linked to nature is a controversial topic for feminist artists, but in the following poem and illustration, her chapter titled The Hurting, Rupi successfully compared women to nature because she did it in order to speak out against sexual violence. He guts her with his fingers, like he's scraping the inside of a cantaloupe clean. The following poem and illustration is an example of how Rupi contextualizes the female body as strong, which is again important because historically, the nude female body has only been depicted as representing sexual, male viewing pleasure. Our backs tell stories no books have the spine to carry. Just like in Vogue, women's liberation took the fashion world by storm in a sense that women were always the object of desire, and suddenly women were telling their stories and proving that their representation of their bodies wasn't meant to be seen as desired by men, but simply trying to be their real and authentic selves. Hamish Bowell states in the video, "What is the story here is something that Vogue has never shown before. The woman was always the object of desire, and suddenly you had a woman who was clearly thinking about sex and had powerful, lustful thoughts, and it was kind of incredible that it was sort of captured in a picture. I mean, if this all sounds so insane to be saying this now, but I mean in the context of what became before, it was really radical." In Rupi Kaur's poem, she states that women have so much to say, and that just because they carry it well doesn't mean it isn't heavy, and just as a book could tell a story, so can a woman, and that the stories they carry, they want to be able to tell and not keep. But the constant backlash from society when they try to tell their stories makes them keep it to themselves, and the weight of the words they're trying to say become heavy on them, and the only way to release this weight is to speak their truth. This liberation of female empowerment was done through Vogue because they were finally able to destigmatize the way the world saw them and take control. This radicalization was one step closer to women finally being able to lift the burden so heavily felt and let it be known that they are more than just their bodies and that they have a lot to say and they deserve to be heard. The following poem plays with the themes femininity, socialization, and biological determinism. Trying to convince myself I am allowed to take up space is like writing with my left hand when I was born to use my right. You were so afraid of my voice, I decided to be afraid of it too. Rupi doesn't just speak out against injustices like violence, racism, and sexism in her art. She consistently speaks out about injustices such as classism in her day-to-day life and in interviews. For example, Kaur has brought attention to the fact that literary devices can make poetry less accessible, and that literary devices can be agonizing. This raises an important issue, which is that the historical rules of poetry can ensure that certain ideas and truths cannot be expressed. The historical rules of poetry can ensure that certain ideas and truths can become silenced, especially from certain groups of people. In fact, Rupi is constantly taunted for formatting short visual poetry. In a way, taunting her unique style is a way to silence or degrade the rules of poetry that she chooses to abide by. Another way in which she has considered classism in her life, and in her art, is when she consciously decided to publish Milk and Honey on paperback before hardcover, so that underprivileged youth could afford her poetry book.